Hey guys, it's Paradise, and in this one we wanted to bring you some gameplay of each of the three classes, the Rogue, Mage and Warrior in the new Dragon Age the Veilguard, as we did get to play over at the EA headquarters, thanks for sending us there, and I did actually get to try each of these classes out, and they all have a distinct playstyle. So to begin with, here we have the Rogue, which really does play kind of roguey. It's a big focus on parrying, dodging. You have a sword and dagger that kind of acts like dual blades, and a bow and arrow. The interesting thing is the bow and arrow kind of has infinite recharging ammo, and so long as you actually charge the shots, you're very rarely going to run out, and they don't do a lot of damage unless you charge them, so you don't really have a lot of reason to just spam shoot the arrows because they just do so little damage unless charged. But you can see here it is going to be a heavy focus on dodging and parrying. The abilities are also very strong, and we will get to some higher level gameplay with the other classes as we go through. For example, with the Mage, I have some Evoker specialization gameplay, and with the Warrior, I have Reaper gameplay, which is at a much higher level, whereas this here is a much lower level, but you can still see the fundamental core way that the sort of class plays even at a low level, and if it's going to be for you or not. The way that the combat generally works is you have this sort of spidey sense above your head, and as soon as it goes from white to yellow, that means you want to dodge or parry. If it is red, that means you need to dodge, you cannot parry it. Outside of this, you also have things like jump attacks, of course the combos that you're doing, and later on you have an ultimate skill that you unlock, which we will show for each of the classes here as well. To be honest, out of the three classes, I was very impressed with the Rogue, and it was basically one of the top picks in my opinion for how fun it actually was. And if you've checked out our skill tree video with all of the abilities for every class specialization already on the channel, you can see what you will have access to for each class, and the Rogue does have some very strong and spicy looking abilities. You can literally see in this gameplay here, when I do use an ability, it pretty much destroys whatever is hit as long as it lands or they are close to it. And then we have my Mage gameplay, and I have to say the Mage was the most surprising one to me for how different it felt, particularly in comparison to previous games where I often did play the Mage, and I just love this ultimate Kamehameha multi-elemental laser beam there. The Mage is super interesting. You have access to an orb and dagger, which gives you a sort of close range option where you can do a slight ranged attack or these slashing elemental attacks with it. And the way that this works is you build up stacks by doing these slightly more ranged attacks, and then you detonate them with the dagger when you do a hit or a charged hit for some big damage. But you do also have access to a staff that allows you to do further ranged attacks, and the interesting difference between the two is that the dagger and orb can parry, while the staff can sort of guard with a mana shield, which doesn't allow you to perfect guard, it will simply just block the incoming damage so long as I believe you have mana for it. I did find myself leaning towards the dagger and orb and playing that a lot more. I felt like it was a bit more aggressive and tactile, and I liked the option being able to parry when you have that yellow glow above your head. But here you can see against this sort of ogre boss, you do have to play in a very interesting way as a mage in this game. Obviously you can play more close range with the dagger and orb weapon, and later on there are specializations like the Spellblade that lean more into a sort of melee build, but the other mage builds do play more so into that control and ranged playstyle. Again, it felt very different to the previous mages in the Dragon Age series, and I did find myself leaning more so towards the Warrior and Rogue when it came to just the pure enjoyment of the combat, because it was a bit more visceral with them and they were able to be a bit more aggressive. But of course, we'll have to wait and see in the full game when you have a full proper build with all of your gear and skill points and all of that stuff lining up. I think what it is it's a more involved playstyle as a mage this time, where you need to be doing combos, juggling your mana and all that kind of stuff, rather than sitting back and dropping heavy cooldowns and raining death. But here you can see some Evoker mage gameplay, and this is one of the most spectacular of the specializations for the mage when it comes to the animations of some of your moves. You do focus more on cold damage, and the ultimate does a sort of black hole, and there's some other really cool galaxy kind of inspired spells that you can do with this specialization. So if you want to play more of a sort of control mage or an ice mage, the Evoker is definitely a really cool one. And you can see here this spell knocks this darkspawn off the edge, which I just love. But here is a good example of the ultimate, which is basically a black hole. You can see it sucks in all the nearby enemies and does continuous damage to them. A great controlling move. And then when you dump your other spells, once they've all grouped up, it's just damage numbers all over the screen. So the mage is definitely going to be very potent and deadly at higher levels, especially when you combine your spells with the primers and detonators and grouping everything up. And the other specializations also look really cool. But here's another example of the sort of group aspect of the Evoker. When there's a choke point, a death corridor, you can just go ham with some of these big spells. And of course you can drop the ultimate, group them back up, and you can see everything just dies super quick. So the Evoker is a very cool playstyle if you were to lean into a more traditional mage. But then we have the Warrior, and this is where I spec'd into the Reaper specialization, which was the one that intrigued me most, at least sort of by looking through the skill tree. And it's all about siphoning health, applying some debuffs, and detonating with your shield throw, which you'll see soon. When you do these really cool looking scythe moves, you sort of impale an enemy with a green spike, and then you throw your shield, and you see the massive damage numbers. It detonates them, bounces around with all the enemies. So the actual Reaper build is kind of all about priming and detonating with the shield throw, which wasn't fully what I was expecting. I thought I would be doing more melee with the big scythe that you can see when you do those abilities. That being said, the actual priming and detonating, as I played it more and more, did become more and more fun, and I'm not even fully specced out with gear pieces that lean into the stats that sort of favor this kind of build. So this is not an optimal build for this type of playstyle, but you can see the detonations are still dealing some good damage. You can see on this guy here, I'll do a full shield throw without the ability, so he didn't pop the detonation, but the actual explosive throw still does a big chunk of damage and bleeds them. So the Reaper is this really interesting playstyle, and I was preferring the two-handed, but I did play a good chunk with Sword and Shield here, as you can see as well. The Sword and Shield simply wasn't dealing as much damage, but of course was a more defensive option because you could just properly block. You could parry with both of them still. But I have to say, the more I played Sword and Shield, the more I did vibe with it, but I think the other specializations are better to lean into if you do want to purely stick with the Sword and Shield. You can see here you've got some abilities like putting down this shield around you that will sort of auto parry and damage nearby enemies, so it gives you like a free hit, so you can just keep going ham while that's up. And you can also see I'm trying heavily to go for parries here. I'm trying to prime them with my ability and then detonate them with a shield throw, boom, like there. You know, each shield throw is doing like 1,000 damage, which on these high level guys isn't tons, but as we saw before, it can just scale up and up from there. And you'll see on this big group here, when they're all together, multiple of them have been primed, and I get this throw, it's going to just devastate all of them. Like, the damage is just crazy, as you can see with this build. And they did actually say in their preview as well that the shield throw builds were some of the most powerful in their testing, and they actually had to nerf it. So this is even after it's been nerfed. I can see it definitely being very strong. This is the actual ultimate that comes with the Reaper. You do this big tornado that pulls enemies in, constantly damages them, and siphons their health to you. So it's a very cool visual specialization for the Warrior, and I did really enjoy just how, I don't know, the Warrior just felt tactile in its combat. You really did feel like you were doing big meaty hits. The parries felt good, the bouncing shield felt good. So as someone that traditionally plays the Mage and likes to do all those flashy moves, with the new action combat, I was kind of vibing with the Warrior and the Rogue. This is another example of priming these two enemies and then doing a full explosive shield throw, like almost 3,000 damage from that. It is a pretty wacky build. And with this actual specialization, it turns that shield throw into the explosive shield throw if you want to, with the button prompt that you would have seen on the screen. So there's a lot that you can do with this sort of weird ranged Warrior playstyle on the Reaper. And here we're going to have another example in just a second of the ultimate and how strong it is as this sort of necrosis tornado ultimate. It's just very cool to pull off, especially when there's a big group of enemies, or a particularly strong enemy like this guy is here with that yellow armor bar, which is like on top of the health bar. So to be honest, I would say each class feels very different. They each have their own playstyle that they lean into, and they each sort of favor a different person in how you want to play. Do you want to be more control based and sort of mid-range to long range? The Mage might be for you. Do you want to be focusing on rapid hits, super parry and dodge focus than the Rogue? Or do you want to just get in things' faces and do big charged meaty slams with the two-handed weapon, or be like your front line of your team, the bulwark of your team? Then the Warrior might be the one for you. You can see the two-handed weapon on the Warrior does some real meaty damage, especially when it's charged. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this impressions and gameplay of each of the classes that are here in Dragon Age the Veilguard. We have more videos on the channel like the skill tree, my full impressions and review, and all that good stuff. So make sure you're subscribed down below, and we'll have more videos on your favorite games coming very, very soon.